Chapter 2 Voices in the Dark. The living room was darker than it had any right to be. Even with lanterns trembling along the mantel, the fire had given up to a bed of ruddy ash, and the fog outside pressed its face to the windows like a nosy ghost. Candlelight sat in little saucers across the room, soft islands of gold that didn't quite touch the corners. Phoenix sat cross-legged on the rag rug with his hands around his knees and the small herb pouch Mama had tied for him. He held it like a talisman, breathing in the clean, stubborn smell of sage and rosemary. He hadn't moved since Meemaw's voice first crackled into the room, a dry, intelligent rasp that made the hairs rise along his arms. Wyatt had his guitar across his lap, though his fingers hadn't found a chord since the cat spoke. He had, however, found the expression that always made Phoenix snort. Cheeks puffed, eyes crossed, a tongue poked to one side like he'd swallowed a marble sideways. It hovered on his face now, not quite complete. "Yes," Meemow said at last, tail swishing once, crisply. "I speak. I always have, when the window opens. You people never time your listening very well." Sean Sr. glanced at Amanda, then back to the cat. He had the look he wore when a fence went down in a high wind, a careful measuring of the problem, not the sort of face a man made for the miraculous. Still, he accepted a fact when it stood in front of him. "Then you'd better give it to us straight," he said. "Whatever this is." Meemaw's green eyes flashed like struck glass. "The legend isn't a bedtime story. The spirit hunter is real, and he is punctual. Every 5 years, give or take a nightfall, he crosses over. He doesn't take bodies. He takes what breathes inside them. He prefers the small and the bright. Children, creatures that still carry wonder in them." Her whiskers quivered, and for a heartbeat, she looked very old. "I have seen him twice before. I intend not to meet him tonight. The hunter," Phoenix whispered. The pouch grew hot in his palm. How does he get in?" "Through the cracks," Stella said, and the family jumped, because it was the Bringle dog this time, not the cat. Stella stepped from the hearth shadows with a soldier's steadiness, her hackles only a little raised now. "Through dreams, through wrong air, through water when it forgets itself." Hank moved up beside her, heavier, slower, a rumble already working in his chest. Last time he tried the creek, he brought fog with him to hide his edges. Wyatt lowered the guitar carefully to the floor. "And you too? You can talk as well?" "Only at night," Stella said. "Only until midnight. That's the rule for us. And the clock turns, our mouths shut like snapped traps." She looked towards the carriage clock on the bookcase. Its tick felt too loud now that someone had named it. "We've got time, but not enough to waste." Amanda shook out her hands, her calm returning in layers. Lanterns, herbs, togetherness. "That's what my Nan always said about bad nights." She moved to the cupboard, took down jars, measured without measuring. Leaves and stems whispered against each other, almost like they were glad to be chosen. She made 2 more pouches, one for Wyatt, one for Sean Jr., and fixed them with loops of twine. "On you, not in your pocket," she said, dropping the sternness into her voice that meant she loved them. "Necks or belts, no arguing." "I wasn't going to argue," Wyatt said, argument already in his grin. He slipped the twine over his head and immediately tried to balance the pouch on his nose, eyes crossed again. Phoenix couldn't help it. Laughter escaped him, tiny and high, like a tea kettle catching. Amanda's mouth twitched. "Wyatt," she said, unable to keep the warmth from the warning. "Better to laugh than to shiver," Wyatt said, and made a face so ridiculous that even Meemaw's whiskers curled at the corners. Something tapped the window. It was a tiny sound, barely more than a fingernail on glass, but in the hush it struck like a spoon on a bell. Everyone froze. The tap came again, 2 quick touches near the latch, then nothing. Sean Jr. stood before anyone told him to. I'll look. I'm coming, Sean Sr. said, already lifting the lantern from the mantel. He looked at Amanda, Mama, and she nodded. It wasn't a frightened nod exactly, but it wasn't brave either. It was practical. It said, "We know how to do hard things." "Keep together," he added, voice low. "No one alone, even to the hallway." "Got it," Wyatt said quickly. "Buddy system." He scooted closer to Phoenix until their knees touched. "We'll make funny faces at anything that gets ideas." "You will not," Meemow said. "If it knocks at the glass again, you will make silence." The door latch clicked. Cold, damp air complicated the candle smell as the men stepped outside. The fog slid through the crack like a cat, and then was gone when the door closed. For a breath, the whole room listened to the knob settle back into place. Inside, Amanda scattered a pinch of herbs along the sill, then laid a neat line like a patient seamstress. She added a jar of salt beside the plants she kept there year-round. The rosemary looked suddenly braver with company. "Tell me the last time," Amanda said without looking away from the window. "Start at the beginning, so I don't miss any steps." "The beginning was quiet," Stella said, "like this." "We heard the geese first." She broke off because the window tapping sounded again, very close, like whatever was out there had a blueprint of the house. Hank growled. Someone's breath hitched. "Ready?" Wyatt whispered, eyes flicking toward the door. Stillness. Meemow hissed. "Listen." There. A third tap, lighter. Phoenix pictured a knuckle. Then, a faint scrape, and a soft, apologetic thud on the stoop. A shadow angled past the window, and for a heartbeat Phoenix thought he saw a hand. "Dad," he whispered, though he knew it wasn't, because his dad didn't walk like a smudge. Meemow's ears pinned back. "It's nothing with a name we need to worry over." They waited. The door remained shut. From deeper in the house, the carriage clock ticked like a patient hammer. Outside, the fog swallowed everything beyond the porch light. It wasn't ordinary fog. It was a fog that knew what it was doing, rolling itself in tight to the old boards, winding between the shoes by the mat, pressing its cheek against the doorknob, like a child too bold for bedtime. Sean Sr. lifted the lantern, and the light trembled, quickening the shadows. Next to him, Sean Jr. squinted across the yard toward the peach tree, where they'd hung the lanterns earlier. The low boughs wore their glow like pendants, blurring in the damp. "Did you see it?" Sean Jr. whispered. The white of his breath did a brief trick in the light. "See what?" "I thought someone moved near the kitchen window." "Fog plays at the edges," Sean Sr. said, though he wasn't sure. The fog did not usually tap glass. He started down the steps, the lantern swinging at his thigh, his boots studding hollow and careful. Gravel shifted under them, sharp little crunches. The geese in the distance murmured and then fell strangely quiet, as if they'd remembered they were supposed to be asleep and then decided to actually do it. On the porch boards, a small shape huddled against the doorframe, feathers fluffed, head tucked. The lantern light fell across it, a chicken, one of their speckled hens, half asleep and confused. Sean Jr. let out a breath he'd been holding wrong. "Oh, Penny," he said under his breath, recognizing the little notch in her comb. "She got out." Sean Sr. bent, hand open. "Come on, girl." The hen blinked, tilted her head and stood. A gust teased the fog. The chicken shook herself and did a very faint, indignant cluck, as if the night had personally disappointed her. "False alarm," Sean Sr. said. He didn't smile, but the words had relief in them. "Let's put her in." Inside they heard the funk of boots, the small burst of warm air when the door opened, the shuffling cluck. Wyatt's shoulders fell in a pretend swoon. "Terrifying," he whispered, the speckled menace. "Don't," Amanda said, but her voice had eased a fraction. She took Penny from Sean Sr.'s careful hands and passed the hen to Phoenix, who held the chicken with solemn devotion, like a squirming, offended bouquet. The hen settled, making round little noises that were all complaint and no decision. Sean Sr. nodded to Amanda, then to the room as a whole. "Full scare," he said. Common sense says there'll be more of those tonight. He brushed damp from his sleeve, adjusted the lantern, and looked to the dogs. You said the creek last time. Stella's eyes had never left the window. It shines before it takes, she said, like a thing that thinks beautiful is the same as good. Right. Sean Sr. tipped his head toward the door. We're checking the creek. In and out. If anything bangs, you stay put. If anything calls, you don't answer, unless it is our voice. And you, he looked at Wyatt, whose face was already halfway to a clown. Use your face sparingly. Wyatt pressed his lips together, the picture of innocence. His eyes could not stop laughing. They went. The fog seemed to have been waiting for them, stepping aside with the reluctance of a crowd letting a fireman pass. Sean Jr. walked a little behind his dad, watching the way the lantern made a halo on the ground. He had the odd feeling of being followed by his own light. The path to the creek ran between the herb beds and the goat pen. The herbs, dark and spiky in their winterish shapes, pointed in thought toward the house. The goat pen looked normal from the outside. Rails, latch, shadow of the shed, though something about the darkness inside the shed felt deliberate, like a person holding their breath. You feel that? Sean Jr. asked. What is it? Wrong pressure. The air's heavy. They passed under the edge of the peach tree. Its paper lanterns swung and ticked against each other, a polite applause. One light hiccuped and then steadied. The fog stroked the bark like a hand that assumed would be friendly. Down the slope, the creek usually tripped over itself, shallow and excited in its own small way. Tonight it whispered, like thin silk pulled through fingers. The men stood at the edge where the walks flattened into a shelf that dipped under water in summer. The lantern flame faltered, as if something breathed on it from the wrong direction. At first it looked like the moon had fallen into the creek and decided to learn to swim. Pale light gathered itself under the surface, pooling, not reflecting, as though the water carried it like a secret smuggled close. Then Sean Jr. realized the swirl at the bend was curling the wrong way. The water, gentle but stubborn, pulled upstream, reversing its home without a fuss, as if gravity were a suggestion and it had heard a better one. Dad, Sean Jr. said softly, I see it. The glow deepened, milk into pearl. A branch moved across the far bank with no wind to partner it. Pebbles underfoot tensed, as if they too had an opinion. The men stood very still. Back in the living room, Amanda braided quiet into the room the way she did before storms. Chores that looked like care, straightening a blanket, placing more salt by the back door, filling the kettle. These were to keep hands from floating away. Wyatt strummed a single chord without thinking, and immediately regretted it. The sound felt like a stone dropped down a well. He tucked the guitar under the couch and made himself a shield as silliness. Okay, situation report, he announced brightly, though his voice had a tremor that kept it honest. Phoenix has his anti-spook pouch. I have mine. Amanda, has enough herbs to season a medieval feast. Meemow is a sarcastic wizard. Stella is a knight, Hank is a battering ram, and I, he said with solemn dignity, am the face guy. Phoenix giggled again. Meemow did not look amused, but her ears relaxed a millimeter. Tell us the rest, Amanda said softly, eyes on Stella and Meemow. From last time, if there's a pattern, I need to know it. The pattern is this, Meemow said. He tests first, taps, scratches, whispers, tastes the edges to see where the fear is softest. He loves a window because it's almost a door. He loves a creek because water is a road that ignores fences. He prefers a house with music in it. He can hear where you laugh. Wyatt blinked. Well, that explains his interest in us. Once he decides where you are weakest, Meemow went on, he distracts. He sends braver things to the porch, she nodded toward the hen, who had fallen asleep under Phoenix's hand, and he slips behind what you love. Amanda swallowed, thinking of the peach tree, of how she had tucked lanterns into it with Sean Sr. and Sean Jr. earlier, laughing about the high branches being for next year, how hopeful they had been 2 hours ago, how ordinary. Stella's voice gentled. 5 years ago, we walked the bank all night, Hank and I. We could talk then, like now, and we used it like a tool. We would growl to draw him to us, then step back, keeping him from the house. Your Mama, she corrected herself quickly, and the dog's eyes warmed with their own version of a smile. She lined the windows with herbs. She set lanterns on the sills and made a small ring of salt inside the back door. Your dad fixed the loose latch. Your geese complained and then settled, and when they stayed settled, we knew we were holding. What happened in the end? Wyatt asked. The creek turned itself right way again, Hank said simply. The fog pulled off like a blanket someone decided they were done using. The hunter gave up, or he found easier pickings in the wood behind Mr. Ainsley's place, though I hope not. We slept for a whole day when it was done. Meemow sat on the windowsill and pretended she hadn't done anything, but we saw her watching the water. Meemow's tail flicked, guarding, watching, pretending. Cats contain multitudes. A faint clatter from the kitchen made everyone jump. Metal on wood, a quick skinny sound. Amanda held up a hand and went first, peering around the doorway into the darkened room. The candle by the sink threw a modest halo. On the counter, a spoon rolled to a stop against a bowl like it had been nudged. On the far side of the table, the back door latch had trembled and fallen still. Wind, Wyatt whispered. Amanda listened for a breath longer. Or a mouse, she said, which nearly made Wyatt laugh, except he didn't think he could stop once he started. She backed into the living room again. Stay away from the back door, she said to no one in particular, and everyone at once. Noted, Wyatt said, drawing his knees up, wrapping his arms around them, and immediately unfolding again because he'd sat on his Erd pouch. The carriage clock ticked on, the little spring inside shouldering its job. The room breathed shallow and slow. Phoenix looked at the clock's hands and then at Meemow. If you can only talk till midnight, he asked, what happens if you need to warn us after? We won't, Meemow said, with a kindness that wasn't mean. So we'll warn you now. Do not look at the creek too long. Do not answer your name if it doesn't come from a mouth you know. If something knocks that sounds like a polite person, it isn't. If it sounds like a rude person, it might be your uncle, she added, and Wyatt finally let out a laugh that sounded like pulling a cork. Got it, he said. Polite bad, rude potentially fine. I can work with those odds. Outside, the men moved along the fence by the goat pen, the lantern cupping their faces in accident halos. Count, Sean Sr. said. Daisy, Clover, Thrip. Where's Poppy? Sean Jr. pressed his fingers into the wire. The goats bleated once, unsettled and low. Poppy? He called softly. Usually that name brought a rustle of straw and a smug little bleat. Tonight, there was nothing. They circled the pen, checked the latch, the boards, the run along the back. No break, no drag mark, no hoofprints straying away in the mud, just the fog, which didn't show footprints unless it wanted to. Back shed, Sean Sr. said. They worked around the corner, the lantern testing shadows for willingness to hold still. The shed door was shut. A spider had work overtime on the hinge, busy silk etched with dew. Sean Sr. set the lantern on a level block, took a breath that seemed like it would be too loud, and eased the door open. The dark inside felt like a room that hadn't learned its name yet. He lifted the lantern, and for a second the shed was nothing but the work of their day. A coil of hose, a bucket, feed sacks, the rake they kept meaning to mend. No goat, no fur, nothing knocked over in panic. Sean Jr.'s mouth was a line. She couldn't have just left, he whispered. Something left with her, his dad said, because he was not the kind of man to let an easy explanation stand when it did not explain. He closed the door like a promise and picked up the lantern again. The creek, he said, and they moved toward the sound, or toward the place sound should have been. The creek had quieted, as if told to behave. They reached the bank. The glow had strengthened. It didn't shine up. It shone out along the water itself, like veins of milk in glass. And the pull upstream was undeniable now. The little leaves on the surface traveling the wrong way, obedient, and unbothered. "Dad," Sean Jr. said again, "because there are only so many words for that kind of wrong." He crouched and held the lantern out, and the light pushed into the water and made a shape there. Not a reflection, not exactly, but the suggestion of a long hand under the current, feeling its way along the stones. It withdrew as quickly as it had appeared, leaving a brightness behind that felt like laughter without joy. Sean Sr. straightened fast. "We're done here," he said. "In the house? Now." Back inside, the room had gathered itself around, waiting. The hen had fallen asleep, a warm weight in Phoenix's lap, her breath a tiny engine. Wyatt had started telling a story about a hero named Sir Stinkalot, whose only weapon was a rubber chicken. The tale was utter nonsense and completely perfect. Every time Sir Stinkalot waggled his weapon, Phoenix collapsed into wheezy giggles, then threw nervous glances at the window, as if an uninvited audience might have opinions about rubber chickens. Amanda, Mama, moved in quiet circles that made sense. Kettle, towel, window, pouch, child, dog, husband's coat on the back of a chair. Her movements built a fence the hunter couldn't see and therefore would underestimate. She stopped at the mantel and touched the lantern there, as if thanking it for its job. Meemow jumped to the arm of the sofa, sat very neatly, and lifted a paw to wash her face, as if to say that one can be tidy even on a battlefield. Her voice came softer now, in the way truths do when the night leans in. "He will overreach," she said. "He always does. He believes himself loved because he is so interested in us, but he is only curious about breaking." Amanda said, and found Phoenix's curls with her fingers the way she did when he had bad dreams. He leaned into her hand like he didn't mean to, and she felt the little shiver that ran through him. "You're all right, baby," she murmured. "I've got you." Something rasped along the outside wall, like bristles or reeds dragged over wood. Hank stood, silent now, which was worse than a growl. Stella's head turned a fraction, tracking a movement they could not hear. Wyatt and Phoenix both held their breath, because it felt like theirs might fog the window from this far away. The brass knob on the door clicked. Not a turn, just an acknowledgement. A long second. Then the knob relaxed again, like a failed idea. Wyatt looked at me now with a question that did not fit in his mouth. "Don't," she said simply. The knob stayed still. The rasping passed on toward the back of the house and then away into nothing. The room exhaled all at once, like a choir coming in together on a difficult note. The carriage clock ticked to the half-hour, its chime subdued, embarrassed, to show off. "What time do you think it is?" Wyatt whispered. "Half-past," Phoenix said, trying to sound blasé and landing somewhere near squeaky. "Plenty of time for 2 more tales of Sir Stinkalot," Wyatt said, and launched into an epic about a dragon with allergies that sneezed glitter. Phoenix bent over, laughing, the sound bright and brave. Amanda let it happen. The room needed it, like a lung needs the top of breath. The front latch rattled, not a polite rattle, an urgent one, a clatter, like news. The door burst inward against its chain and caught, jerking to a stop with a hard, hollow thunk that jolted the pictures on the wall. Wyatt shot to his feet, ready to throw himself at anything foolish. Hank's bark detonated. Stella bounded forward, then froze, every muscle quivering, but she did not snarl, which was almost worse. "Dad!" Phoenix called, already moving before Amanda's hand found his shoulder. "It's us!" came Sean Singer's voice, rough in a way that made Amanda's knees weaken. She slipped the chain. The door swung in. Cold rolled across the floor like a roll wave. They stood in the doorway, with the lantern between them. The men, father and son, faces bleached of everything but the story etched on them. The lantern's flame jumped, tried to run, was held. Fog fingered the threshold, and then withdrew, as if scolded. Amanda reached for her husband's sleeve, her voice a single note. "What did you see?" Sean Sr. set the lantern down so hard the table complained. He looked at each of them. Wyatt's fierce, foolish bravery, Phoenix's white-knuckled clutch on the chicken, Amanda's steadying eyes, the dogs frozen like carved dodians. Meemow sitting as if all of this had been expected, and therefore was beneath comment. He took a breath that found the bottom of his lungs. "The creek is glowing," he said, and his voice broke on the word as if it didn't fit a real thing. "Not on it, inside it. And it's flowing backwards, upstream." Wyatt's humor slipped all the way off his face. He didn't finish, because there wasn't a word at hand that could do the job. Sean Jr. sounded younger than he had an hour ago. "And Poppy's gone." He shook his head once, a violent denial of the night's logic. "There's no break in the pen, no tracks, just fog." Like she was lifted, Amanda's hand found Phoenix's shoulder and gripped. She didn't mean to squeeze, but she did. He leaned back into her without looking away from his dad. "How can water go the long way?" Phoenix asked. No one asked everyone. Meemow's tail lashed once, a metronome cutting the room. "It begins." The house heard the words and went very still, like it had to decide whether to breathe. Stella took one step forward, her paw setting down as if testing the idea of floorboards. Hank's wumble came back, lower now, more certain, as if he had found the note he meant to hold all night. "We're not going to panic," Sean Sr. said, though he had to force the shape of the sentence through a throat gone tight. He reached for the chain and settled the door, the click loud as a shot. He looked at each of them again, a roll call of faces he knew better than his own. "We stay together. We keep the lanterns lit. No one goes anywhere alone. We hold the line till morning." Wyatt nodded hard. He found Phoenix's eyes and pulled one last face, subtle, small, tilted at just the right ridiculous angle to pluck a tiny, treacherous smile out of his brother at the edge of tears. When Phoenix's mouth twitched, the room loosened a fraction. Amanda, Mama, moved like a prayer. She set the kettle to boil, though she didn't know if anyone could swallow. She slid a spare pouch across the table toward her husband with fingers that did not shake. "On you," she said simply. He slipped the loop over his head. "On me." Outside, the fog drew itself closer to the windows, as if to eavesdrop. Somewhere down near the creek, the water brightened another shade and considered its options. The peach trees' lanterns clicked against each other like sly teeth. Out in the pen, a space remained where a goat should have breathed. The carriage clock lifted its hands and brought them down again, the tick a patient stride toward midnight. Meemaw's gaze stayed on the door, Stella's ears stayed pricked. Hank's breath steadied into something like a drumbeat. Inside the circle of their small like, the family pressed inward, and the night pressed back.